Okay, so in this video, I'm gonna talk about the books that were most important and impactful on me in 2020. So there's basically three categories. The first are the self-help personal development books that were important in actually helping me change my behavior and start organizing my life. And then the second are a couple of books that really impacted, opened new doors for me and impacted how I saw things analytically. And then there were three books that affected me pretty profoundly, like spiritually and like on a fundamental level, how I saw and related to the world. So I'm going to go in that order. Um, I have the least interest in kind of on their own respect for, or on an emotional level, appreciation for the self help books. But I also want to acknowledge that I needed their support and of other resources in the similar vein in order to actually implement the changes that I have and that I want to continue making to live in alignment with some of the more earth-shattering and spirit-changing things that I had earlier in the year, that I learned or experienced earlier in the year. So the two books that really helped me personal self-help wise was Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the two useful takeaways I got from that, in addition to an overall refresher on the mechanics of habits and common strategies for changing them, were one, having a systematic and process-oriented approach to behavior change rather than trying to change things a single behavior in a vacuum, but looking at your whole life as a system and using repeatable or generalizable processes for aligning your behavior with what you value. And then the second was Personality Isn't Permanent by Benjamin Hardy. So I actually engaged with this book more in the form of a 30-day online course that was based on the material of the book. That format, I think, made it more impactful for me because I did something with it every day, as a video and then a journal prompt. But the content was based on the book, and I read about half the book. And so what I took away from that was the concept of a future self and how to use it as a value clarifying and goal setting tool. And then the idea of basically accepting and reframing and owning your past to turn it from something that weighs you down to you can see the lessons you learn from it and move forward. And then it's worth noting that book is a more self-helpy and more on the individualist, businessy, a little bit. That's more in the course than in the book itself, at least from what I read of it. But that side of the self-help spectrum. But the ideas in it are pretty fundamentally basically from acceptance and commitment therapy. So if that interests you at all, the ideas in it, but you wanted a different flavor of it, then that's where to go with that. Second category of books are the two that I actually have with me to show to the camera. So the first is No Shortcuts by Jane Mcaleevey. This book is all about organizing, and specifically union organizing, and argues for basically militant union organizing, and gives a bunch of overviews and examples of how that's worked, and also gives a really like kind of specific approach about actually doing that work. So the two key concepts that I took away from that were like thinking of people as either like activists versus organizers. And I think this is pretty relevant like across different fields of organizing, but probably even more true in union organizing, though I don't have expertise in that at all. Is Mcaleevey outlines the concept of activists versus organizers. So organizers are the people who are actually like natural leaders in the community. So not necessarily in formal positions of authority, but who people look up to and lots of people have relationships with, and who is kind of like centers of gravity in the community. And their words and actions carry a lot of weight. And then activists are people who are personally engaged with the cause, whatever that may be, but are not necessarily, and particularly in this dichotomy, are not organizers or like I said, like centers of gravity in their community, or particularly like effective or necessarily even interested in organizing other people and bringing them into a movement. So with that, Mcaleevey basically argues that organizers are, you need to identify the people who are like organizers, basically natural leaders, in a given community or workplace, and then get them to buy in to whatever you're trying to do, rather than just trying to like, and working with the people who are already on the same page as you and really enthusiastic. And then the second big concept was the idea of structure testing, and that is basically a system for like building and then testing the capacity of your organization to mobilize and take action. So then the second book was Set the Night on Fire by Mike Davis and John Wiener. This book was recommended to me by a close friend, so I'm going to thank them. And then, so it's a movement history of the 1960s and in Los Angeles. And it's really, really well written and interesting. But the reason I put it on this list, I should also note I've only read about the first half of the book, was it did a couple things that set me up for further reading and understanding stuff that would start happening. So first, it introduced me in a way other than like vaguely like having images in my head to the Black Panther Party, which since then, as I'll talk a little bit more about, I've had a lot of interest in, and what they were about and the way they organized. And so that was really important. And then the second was learning about the Watts Rebellion. And I read about that right before George Floyd was murdered. And so briefly before the uprisings, first in Minneapolis and then across the country. And learning about the Watts Rebellion helped me understand what was happening, and moved from a more like liberal, like peaceful protest understanding to understanding both the sort of not only the justification for it, but the potential effectiveness of insurrection as so that was then like the context as these uprisings are happening. And I'm really grateful for that, because I think I would have responded to them and understood them significantly differently if I hadn't had that context right before. And so then I want to talk about the 3 books that changed me really in a profound, like, spiritual or like how I relate to the world way. So the first is the Autobiography of Assata Shakur. I think technically the title is Assata, an Autobiography. So this book was profound for me in 3 ways. One, she describes her gradual political growth and radicalization and transformation, which, even though she came from a totally different background, was really affirming. And obviously she got to like a much higher or like developed place than I am now, but it gave me both a way to understand and feel less alienated and alone, and seeing like how someone who described relating to the world in ways that felt really similar to me then like turn that into their, like, manifest in their action and adjust their life accordingly, and like that gradual journey. And then second was a significant part of the biography covers Assata's prosecution, unjust prosecution, and imprisonment by the United States, and the strength of will and dedication she showed was really inspiring, and also like what she endured was enraging, but to chronicle like the way the book's structured simultaneously all that she's enduring once she's like reached a place of like a revolutionary place as an individual, and then all this repression and torture she's enduring at the hands of the state, and how absolutely dedicated and strong she remains, and committed, and then also seeing at the same time how she got to that place was just it's incredibly moving and inspiring. And then the other part of it is it made me move significantly to the left conceptually, but also emotionally, in terms of my view of the American state, and particularly the criminal justice system, or the prison police industrial complex. So on a personal level recounts a way the political repression and motivation, the corruption, the malice of that system in a way that made me understand that it was completely irredeemable on not just a conceptual level, but an emotional one. And then the next book that was super meaningful for me was An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. And so that's exactly what it says it is in the title. And it was really, really a hard book to read, but also super radicalizing, and also gave me a sense of more of connection and understanding of my heritage and ancestry as a Choctaw person. So I mean, it's full of the atrocities committed by the United States and the colonies and colonists that preceded it. and demonstrates really powerfully both how they were systematic and then also how American expansion across the continent and the wars they fought to do it and would inform and build the ways that they would conduct empire abroad in more contemporary times. And so, and crucially made the distinction that like seems obvious in retrospect, but I never really thought about, which is that I think I used to think of conflicts with various indigenous nations by the colonies or expanding United States as like internal conflicts and not as like foreign wars. And because now like they're all subsumed in like our boundaries are the United States' boundaries. And this really contextualizes to know that those were foreign wars of conquest as much as wars that were conducted on another continent. And then on the other side of it was how the indigenous histories of resistance as individuals and as groups. And that was really inspiring. And then finally was it connected for me how in addition to other contemporary tactics and ongoing material struggles, that the idea of thinking of the settler colonial genocide of the United States against indigenous peoples as a past thing is part of erasing the continued resistance and survival of indigenous people. And that it was an attempted or partial genocide that was resisted and is continuing to be resisted, and that acting like indigenous people are gone, including by just being like, oh yeah, we did a genocide in the past, or like implicitly in the past, actually furthers that project. And so that was really important to me, and also like radicalizing and like changed my understanding of myself as an individual, like my relationship to my indigenous identity. And then the final book was Pedagogy, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. I'm butchering that name. He's Brazilian. But this talked about how revolutionaries should engage in organizing and education with the masses, like with regular people. And so this is really interesting he has a specific method for that he goes into, but I am not and wasn't in a position to deploy that. And so the parts that were really profound that I took away from it were twofold. Basically, that he articulates in a more like theoretical and philosophical way what I felt sort of as my worldview and world experience and view of humanity on a really deep level and better than I ever could. And so that was really important for me. And again, like a common theme of this was removing my sense of alienation and hopelessness by realizing that the feelings I'm having I'm not isolated in them. And there's a whole history of people who not only felt that way, but then acted based on it, and a whole tradition. And then the other part of it is then that I really connected to was then Freire talked about the process of becoming a revolutionary, and particularly when you're coming from the upper class, relating to and interacting with working people in a way, and just like being effectively like how to be a comrade, and in a true and effective way, and that really resonated a lot, and then also was helpful in thinking about in the wake of all these uprisings, like what allyship or accompliceship or comradeship looks like in the struggle against white supremacy in the United States right now, and in thinking more critically about some of the ideas and approaches. So those were the books that were most impactful for me today, in 2020. And I just want to say, obviously, in certain contexts, I'd recommend all of them. Particularly the three I just named, the last three, I would strongly please read those books if you hadn't. The only thing is, it should go. It should just be clear. A lot of them, particularly Assata and Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, describe some brutal violence, both on an individual level and systemic or mass violence. So be prepared for that. But they were all really transformative and profound for me. So I just wholeheartedly, if you care at all about what I think, just read these books. So thanks for watching.